The tan area on this map, the greater Midwest, that is why the United States is the global superpower and will continue to be so long after our grandchildren are gone. It is the most productive chunk of arable land in the world, more than the next two put together. But as important as that is, it's really the blue lines on that map, the greater Mississippi system, because that is 13,500 miles of navigable waterway. And as you folks know in your industry, moving things from A to B is a bit of a bitch. But if you float it, it's 1/12 the cost. And that is more miles of navigable waterway than the rest of the planet put together. So no matter what happens, the United States is not just going to be agriculturally and industrially rich, but capital rich as well. And that pays for literally everything else. In addition, the United States has mountains and deserts to the south, lakes and forests to the north, ocean moats on either side. In addition to being the richest chunk of territory in the world, it is the most physically secure. So even in the worst case scenario, where somehow there's a third Obama term, and 2 years through there's a freak chopstick accident and Vice President Ted Cruz takes over, and we spend the next 24 years going back and forth between the Clinton and the Bush administrations, you're going to be fine. We can't mess this up. We have tried. Okay. What do we Americans do with this? Well, back in what we think of as ancient history, the world was imperial. The French Navy protected French trade between the French colonies and the French mainland. The Brits did the same, the Japanese did the same, and so on. It was a sequestered imperial system. You did not trade with your neighbor if you could help it, because you never knew when some idiot whose language you didn't speak was going to throw a war, and even if you weren't involved, you could lose access to whatever the raw material or the trade route or the end market was that you thought was so important. Kept things in-house. And if you came across something that you felt you needed, you went out and got it, and you brought it into your network, closed it off from everyone else. These systems competed for resources, for markets, for trade access. Those competitions escalated into wars. Those wars culminated in World War II. Now, at the end of that war, the Americans looked around, realized they were the last men standing, and decided to try something else. Instead of a sequestered system, we would pool all of the world's resources, all of the world's markets, all of the world's waterways into a single globalized network. We called it Bretton Woods, we called it free trade. The idea was that you would be able to sell into any market relatively duty-free and not have to worry about the security of transport. In addition, the United States would open up its market, the only one to really survive the war. At that point, our market was bigger than everybody else's put together. And you could export your way back to affluence. There were a couple of catches, one of which was you had to let us fight the Cold War our way. So NATO, the Japanese alliance, the Taiwanese alliance, these are all military aspects of free trade, not the other way around. How did we enforce it? Not all that complicated. The carrier on the right is a jump carrier. The one on the left is a super. Now, one super carrier has 7 times the combat capability of a jump carrier. There are 10 jump carriers in the world. Not one of them is American. There are 10 super carriers in the world. They're all American. And they're all in the process of being retired to be replaced with bigger carriers. The United States has enjoyed a 10-to-1 force projection ratio versus the combined navies of the rest of the planet for 7 straight decades, and that gap is widening today. And the reason that free trade works, the reason that the world looks the way it does today, is because the Americans have chosen to put that force differential at the service of the global commons and force the world to have free trade. It's the greatest expansion of peace and prosperity in human history. Global population's tripled. Global GDP is expanded by a factor of 10. But never forget that for the Americans, it's never been about trade. It's been about security. We bought up an alliance to fight the Cold War. And as a percentage of GDP, we are the least involved economy in the world. And most of what we trade is with our partners in North America. You are looking at total American exposure to the global system to 2 to 3% of GDP for exports. That's it. And that's going down. So if we ever have a bad hair day, the global system is predicated on American commitment to a system that we stopped using 30 years ago. Not stable, not even a little bit. So that's piece one. Here's piece two. Let's talk demography. This is a standard demographic profile. Children at the bottom, then young adults, mature adults, retirees. It's a pyramid because of simple mortality. Now you can split any demographic profile into three economically interesting pieces. First, you've got your young workers, the people who are starting out. It's all about consumption for these people. It's college and kids and cars and houses and pot. It's spend, 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 spend. But they're at the beginning of their working careers, not a lot of income. So car loans, house loans, college loans. High growth, but high debt. This is your primary end consumer, the young people of the world, roughly aged 20 to 45. Your next group, roughly aged 40 to 65, are your mature workers. They're not consuming so much anymore. They're probably downsizing the house. The kids are moving out. They're at the height of their income, however. They're saving for retirement. This is the tax base. So low growth, but high savings, high investment. This is what funds everything. And then you have your retirees, who can't take the stress, can't take the volatility. They step back from the system. They swap out their stocks and bonds for T-bills and cash. This is normally a strict capital model because you have a medium-sized generation providing the capital for a large one down below. So things like mortgages require your house as collateral. You have to have a business plan to get a business loan. Do we have any Canadians here today? Don't be shy. What the hell is wrong with you people? Because apparently in 1974 you forgot how to have kids. Spent some quality time in Canada. I know you got the basics down. Now you got a bulge here in the Canadian demography in the late 50s and early 60s. That's the capital-rich portion. So tax receipts in the Canadian national government have never been larger. Retiree holdings have never been, near retiree holdings of financial assets have never been higher. So Canada has been able to put into place one of the world's most liberal social welfare systems and still have enough money left over in the couch to pay for the tar sands of Alberta, which are one of the most capital-intensive industries that humanity has ever attempted, and is still going strong. But in 7 years, that bulge moves into mass retirement, and all that money goes away. And Canada will go from being one of the world's most capital-rich economies to one of the most capital-poor in less than a decade. That means no more consumption because there's not a replacement generation. That means no more investment because there aren't enough mature workers. Exports is their only option 10 years from now. Here's the United States. Now, where are my baby boomers? People born 1946 to 1965, do not be shy. Put your hands in the air. All right, yeah, freaking Roman legion. You guys are the largest generation as a percentage of the population that the United States has ever put together. And the problem with your generation, well, one of the problems with your generation is there's too damn many of you. And when you do anything, you do so as a phalanx. And when you entered the workforce all those years ago, you took over all the jobs, and there weren't enough jobs to serve your needs, so you started taking jobs that were beneath your skill set. You pushed down labor costs because of your mass. And now that you're nearing retirement, you're doing exactly the same thing in the world of finance. You are chasing after whatever investment opportunity you can find, hoping that you can get to it before your neighbor does. And so you have made some questionable decisions in the last 15 years in your search for yield. So Enron, that's your fault. Subprime is your fault. Disco is your fault. You have created an investment bubble in financial products the world over. And so the brick boom was possible because you financed it. The current boom in Africa is your money. And in 8 years, when the majority of you are retired, all that money comes home. We are going to go from this current moment of open trade and boomer-financed everything to one most likely of closed trade, and all of a sudden the boomers' money is all going to be gone. Now, where are Gen Y? People born between 1981 and 2000. I realize it's a little early for that crowd, but there might be a few. There's a few. Thanks for showing up. Alarm clocks do work. Now, you have many of the same problems that your parents did. There's too many of you. Now, you have a couple of advantages that your parents did not have. First of all, you are the best educated population we've ever had. So when it comes to this new Uber economy where everyone has a new career every 2 weeks, you are actually fairly well prepared for that, not just educationally, but also politically and socially. Second, half of you still live at home. And of the half that have moved out, half of them were only able to do so because of continual cash infusions from the bank of mom and dad. We are in the midst of the greatest wealth transfer in American history without anyone dying yet, which is a disaster for Gen Xers like me. All right. Where are my other Xers? People between 1965 and 1980. Yeah. Oh, hey, we're all here. We're screwed. First of all, the boomers took all the jobs, so we were the intern generation for the first decade of our professional careers. We are only now that some of us are edging up into our 50s, starting to actually close the historical income gap. Ugh. Second, as the boomers retire, we, a small generation, will be expected to not only provide the capital for Gen Y's pot purchases, but also to pay for Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid for the boomers who have now transferred too much money to their children to pay for their own retirement. So we are looking at marginal tax increases of probably 50%. Yeah, no laughter from that one. Now, as much as I dog on Gen Y, and they do deserve it, thank God they're there. 2 reasons. First of all, they're a young population cohort. The reason why economic growth in the United States is so strong right now is because of their consumption. Second, in 15 years, when Gen Y matures, and I use that word in its loosest possible way, they will fill out the tax-paying ranks in a way that Gen X never could. So by 2030, this flips again. And we go back to having a large generation that is financing everything. But what really pisses me off is that Gen Y is special. They're the only ones out there. This is the developed world demography without the United States. Everyone else has the Canada problem. There's no Italian-wise or German-wise or Japanese-wise. And so in just 15 years, we go from today, where the United States is the largest consumer power and largest financial power, to one in just 15 years, where we're the only financial power and only consuming power. So we got 15 more years of budget battles in Congress, and of primaries and caucuses like the one that happened a couple days ago. Whew, that was entertaining. And then things kind of get back to normal, but not anywhere else. Quick look around the world. Top right, that's Japan, the world's oldest society, 3rd fastest aging. But here's Korea, aging even faster. Developed Asia is the most rapidly aging part of the world, and it is already well over the American average age. Top left, Russian Federation. There was a 60% drop-off in the birth rate post-Cold War, which means everyone who will be in the Red Army in 5 years will have been born during the baby bust. Red Army will shrink by half in the next 5 years. So if the Russians are going to use military tactics and strategies to change their neighborhood, they have to do it now. And so they are. Bottom left, Italy. Greece, Spain, Ireland have very similar demographies. It is physically impossible for peripheral Europe to economically recover because they don't have a consumption base anymore. And their labor is now aged to the point that it's too expensive to compete even on exports. So you're looking at the European system in its best case scenario, lasting another 7 to 8 years. Bottom right, People's Republic of China. 25 years after the installation of the one-child policy, they're running out of 25-year-olds. People tell me the Chinese are good at math. It is not in the data. It's worse than it looks. See that blue fringe on the right? That's the surplus male population. You have a one-child policy, you have a patriarchal society, you have female infanticide. There's a 10% sex imbalance. That's worse than it sounds. Because when the industrialists in the coast realized that labor costs were skyrocketing, they went inland to find more workers, and they came back only with the women. Because you can put 6 chicks into a 300 square foot apartment. You do that with 6 dudes, severed head in the fridge by the end of the month, every time. Men and women of childbearing age in China are not simply separated by socioeconomic status, they are separated by physical province. That's a terminal demography. You can't recover from that. So that's 2. Let's talk 3. 3's energy. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the shale sector right now, but there's a series of technologies that are percolating through that are in the process of becoming industry standard that are going to make shale competitive even at today's prices, and do so fairly quickly. So I want to talk about 2. The first one is something called 3-dimensional seismic, 4-dimensional seismic. Now, seismic, 2D seismic, is something that has been in the industry for 20 years. The idea is you have a sound truck, it sends down sound waves, it hits the formation, some of that sound comes back, sonar basically. And drill. And the results are absolutely gorgeous. We have not drilled a dry well in 3 years. We have not drilled a low productivity well in a year and a half. And now we're marrying that to new drilling techniques. It used to be that you'd have a single pad on the surface, it would send down 1 pipe a mile and then go laterally 600 feet. That was back in 2005. 6 years later, that horizontal spur went from 600 to 6,000 feet, 10 times the reservoir contact for the same cost on the surface. As of 2 years ago, we had pad drilling. We combined all that surface infrastructure and sent everything down from the same point. And now we have multilateral drilling. 1 pipe going down up to 20 miles of horizontal spurs. The input cost for steel, for sand, for water, for labor has dropped by 80% in the last 2 years. That's why we have oil output in this country that is actually rising, despite the fact we have only 15% the same number of drills and oil prices below $30. Which gives us this. Here's the price structure as of 4 years ago. The horizontal is the volume of oil produced. The vertical is the cost per barrel. Back in 2012, way over there on the left was US shale. Not a lot came out, and it was very expensive. With these new technologies, here's where we are today. The break-even cost on average in the American shale fields is now just over $40 a barrel. It'll probably be pushing $30 by the end of this year, which will make US shale cost competitive with every oil patch in the world outside of the Persian Gulf itself. We are, in the energy sector, not waiting for shale production to fall off. We're waiting for those politically unstable places like Venezuela or Nigeria to see their output collapse. That's what would correct prices under normal circumstances at this point. It's not going to be a shale correction. It'll be others. Which gives us this for liquids. The blue is American oil production. Red and green, imports from our friends in Canada and Mexico. The double hash is 2007. That's when commercially viable volumes of crude came in from the shale fields for the first time. You can see the spike in output since then. Here's consumption. Well, that's interesting. What's going on there? What happened in 2007 that made that flatline and drop? Well, 3 things. 1, we had a recession. Industrial output dropped. Energy consumption dropped with it. 2nd, we have something called demand destruction. When you're convinced that oil prices are going to be higher for longer, you invest, you personally and you and your corporation, invest in things that will reduce your energy footprint. You buy a Prius, you put up solar panels. And those don't just destroy demand when you're using them or when you own them, but they're part of the fleet for the next 20 to 30 years because it's a freaking Toyota and they just don't break down. And then there's demography. Because when you're 35, you take your kids to soccer practice and you drive to work. When you're 55, you just drive to work. And when you're 75, you don't drive much at all because the kids keep taking away your keys. Per capita oil demand declines with age. And in 2007, the oldest of the baby boomers retired. We are looking at 10 to 20 years of secular energy decline. Demand decline in the United States, which means that that black line and that stack of colors will probably cross in the next year or two. And that assumes no spike in prices that makes the shale drillers just suddenly drop a bunch of pipes into the ground. That could make it happen in 6 months. The world of oil, it's not entering a new normal. It's convulsing, and what comes out of it will be anything but normal. Now, this is what it looked like on the dawn of shale. You had two mammoth markets, Western Europe, North America. Each of them took crude from 30 different places. Lots of arbitrage opportunities for the super majors. Very messy. And if you had a cargo that you couldn't find a home for, you sent it to Asia, dear sweet Asia, because they would take whatever they could get. There is no oil production of consequence in East Asia. So you have the world's largest supply route to a very thirsty area, and they had to pay a premium because of that. Today, things have changed. The shale revolution has knocked 7 million barrels per day off of the American import bill. 7 million. 3/4 of that was from OPEC. Western Europe has proven that you can make a financial crisis the new normal. They have not had economic growth on average since 2006. And it doesn't look like they're going to break out of it anytime soon, in part, increasing in part, because of their demographic implosion. Which meant that if you wanted to sell your crude anywhere, you had to get it to an Asian country. Instead of them taking the scraps, they were the only game in town. So the Asian premium turned into an Asian discount. That's one of the reasons why the Chinese build-out in plastics has been so successful of late. They're paying less for the crude. But here's where we're going. You remove the American security guarantee. You change the global demographic, and you get a sharp break in the market and a breakdown in the ability to export crude from large portions of the world. Now, oil has a derivative called naphtha, which fuels the plastics industry. We are looking at a global oil and global naphtha shortage of a scale we have not seen since 1942. But not everywhere. Because in the United States, the supply is local. And it's even worse than that, because shale crude is very light, very sweet. That's the exact crude you want if you want a high naphtha cut. So while the rest of the world is starving for naphtha, North America will be swimming in it. Here's how it's going to break down. First of all, let's talk about the Russians. Now, that red splotch, that is majority Russian populations. The Russians have a series of severe physical geography barriers on the western edge of that red zone, the tallest of which is about the same height as a Kansas interstate on-ramp. It's just flat open. You can walk across it. Ask any German. They love to march through this area. Now, the way the Russians look at this, they see 3,500 miles of open terrain. And what they want to do is they want to forward position their troops in these gaps between these seas and between these mountains. And if they can achieve that, the amount of vulnerable territory shrinks from 3,500 miles to 600 miles. And they can do that with an army half the size that they have now. So Ukraine is just step one, and the Russians do not see this as an offensive war. They see it as a defensive war. That's a problem if you use Russian crude, because here is the Russian oil export network, almost all of which goes through the conflict zones and through the areas that the Russians want to pre-position. So you're looking at 5 to 6 million barrels per day of crude oil export capacity that at a minimum is at a degree of severe risk. If you're using Russian crude to make your naphtha, game over. Middle East. Now, there's any number of ways that I could talk about the Middle East, especially how the Saudis and the Iranians are now at each other's throats. There's political differences, demographic differences, religious differences, ethnic differences, and now, because of shale, economic differences. They're both trying to export exactly the same crude along exactly the same route to exactly the same end customer, because North America is no longer in the game. But really, Just think of it as like the UT Texas A&M rivalry, just with more guns. And like all of the world's great rivalries, eventually fans end up in the wrong bar. This is Khuzestan, aka Kyle Field. This is home to 3 million ethnic Arabs in Persian Iran. The Saudi intelligence services are working to foment a rebellion in this area, specifically to throw the Iranians off their game. Why there? Well, those Arabs live on top of 80% of Iran's oil production capacity. Down here at the UT Tower, aka the Gwar Superfield, you have 2.5 million religious Shia living in Sunni Saudi Arabia. And the Iranian intelligence services are trying to do the same thing down here that the Saudis are doing in Khuzestan. Just those two areas, that's 11 million barrels per day of oil production capacity. And that assumes nobody gets caught in the crossfire. There are already 5 hot wars going on in the Middle East with these two backing opposite sides. Syria, by the way, is what it looks like when the Saudis are winning. 20 million barrels per day is a threat in the Persian Gulf. Not to be outdone, let's look at East Asia. Now, the red bars are oil import volumes, all the way on the right. The green bars are oil export volumes, all the way on the left. Convenient 7,000 miles apart. What happens when there are shortages of Russian crude, Iranian crude, or Saudi crude, and Saudi crude? Northeast Asia is at the very end of the global supply chain. And any shortages felt anywhere in the world are borne in their near entirety by Northeast Asia, because everyone else can take what they want along the way. So if you are Japanese or Korean or Taiwanese or Chinese, your only solution is to take your navy, sail it to the Persian Gulf, pick sides in a Middle Eastern knife fight, and then physically escort the crude home. Because there's not going to be enough for everybody. Now, as we all know, nothing could go wrong here. Because the Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese and Taiwanese have a centuries-long history of brotherly love and cooperation. And they're very good at sharing. But imagine what happens the first time one Northeast Asian Navy vessel shoots at one tanker. God forbid they capture it or sink it. Think of what that will do to the cost of transport. Go through the roof. Think of how the global supply chain system has evolved since Bretton Woods came in. It used to be that you'd have these massive industrial conglomerate sites where everything was built and fabricated and assembled and then shipped out as a final product. Not anymore. Now, every single piece of that process has been stripped out and outsourced to whatever facility in whatever country can do it most effectively. It's not so much that the tires are from one facility and the engine blocks from another. It's like the ball bearings are from one place and the spark plugs are from another. Thousands of pieces from most industrial inputs. You raise the cost of transport by 10%, God forbid you triple it, half of those suddenly are no longer viable. We're on the edge of being in a world where input and production and demand don't just need to be physically guarded, they need to be co-located. And the only place in the world where that happens is North America. You guys talk about PET, some of you call it Pete, but for purposes of this presentation, that name is taken already. If you have a naphtha shortage, if you have problems with transport, things look fantastic for recycling, right? I mean, look at that. You got the bulk. Over 1/3 of the world's PET is produced in East Asia, China and Korea specifically. And if they can't get the input for the oil, they can't get the naphtha, they can't get the plastic. You're looking at oil prices in the rest of the world being roughly 4 times what they are here. Because here we've got a sequestered system, there they're dependent on long-haul transport. That's both wondrous and disastrous for you folks. Wondrous in that the cost of global plastic is going to skyrocket, and selling into that market is brilliant. Disastrous in that the one country that is an exception to that is the one that you operate in. And naphtha costs here will be lower than everywhere else. And there's one other horrible complication you need to start taking into consideration. and that's natural gas. This is what I like to call the checkbook map. Because everybody who has a light on that map has a checkbook. Now, there are 3 population centers worth drawing attention to. First, you've got the booming disco capital of Bismarck, North Dakota. In the center, the cultural mecca of Midland, Texas. And down south, the stone-cold, boring urban corridor of Austin, San Antonio, where I live. People live there, they have lights. What are these? These are the shale fields. The Barnett up north, the Bakken up north, the Permian in the middle, and the Eagle Ford down south. Why are they lit up? No one lives there. I mean, western North Dakota, really? No. They're shale flares. It's all about transport. People are after the oil because oil's easy to move. It's a liquid. It'll stay put if you want it to. You can put it into a tanker. You can put it into your pocket, into a trunk, into a bucket, whatever you want. Natural gas isn't. It's a gas. And you need a pressurized collection system, a pressurized transport system, and a pressurized use system. And unless you have that entire system in place on day one, you don't have a natural gas industry. And so we have to flare. We have the world's most advanced and flexible natural gas transport system here in the United States, but we still have to flare volumes that you can see from space. Think about what that means for you. Up to 40% of the natural gas we use in this country is a waste product. It's sold into the system at zero. Natural gas has not until recently been used in the plastic industry in large volume because of cost. Well, that cost issue is now gone. There are $900 billion in greenfield investments into natural gas transport and processing that have already been paid for, all of which will be operational by the end of 2020 just in this country, to take advantage of the fact that we can't build use facilities for the natural gas from the shale fields fast enough. The reason that coal has vanished, or is vanishing from the fuel mix, is this. The reason that those flexible plastic containers have become so popular is because they're polymers made out of this. The cost for virgin plastic in the United States is going to historical lows, and it will hold there as long as the shale revolution holds. And that, conservatively for oil, is 30 years, and conservatively for natural gas is 75. Sorry. Here are the things that are natural gas intensive. Here are the things that are electricity intensive. The first one on that list, that's $1,500 per family of 4 per year. That's the biggest tax cut that we've seen in the post-World War II era, just because of cheap electricity. And here are the ones that you guys care about, almost at the tops of the list. These are industries where we were seeing massive build-out in productive capacity, and that is your primary competitor, not China. Forget China. It's right here at home. Yeah, that made the room quiet. Okay, the story with wood pulp is a little bit different. Now, you've got 3 primary producing zones for wood pulp. North America, nothing's really changing there. It might be a slow drop-off just simply because of labor costs. Then you've got South America, where Brazil is far and away #1, and Southeast Asia, which is the big up-and-comer. Here's the problem. While Europe is going to destabilize, and East Asia is going to destabilize, and the Middle East is going to destabilize, these are really the only 3 parts of the planet that aren't. So the virgin inputs don't see much of a change in their cost structure, particularly in the Western Hemisphere, where you don't have to worry about tanker wars. That's a mixed bag, because they're also going to be stable growing markets. First and most importantly, in my opinion, is Southeast Asia. Now, the green on this map are tropical zones. The lighter green is where you are lucky enough to get a dry season. Now, unlike the United States, where our background is in row crop agriculture and where you can invest in production to get a combine and move up the technical value-added chain, you can't do that in tropical agriculture. In a word, tropical agriculture sucks. Because each pineapple has to be planted by hand. Each pineapple has to be harvested by hand and then moved in a box one at a time. That's pretty much standard for all tropical output. So, if you work in tropical agriculture, and you know there's no upward mobility, and you know there's no room to increase your personal income, everybody comes to the same conclusion: get the hell out. And so Southeast Asia has the densest urban footprint in the world, more than China. Over half their population now lives in their major cities. And because they're separated by tropics and mountains and islands, Southeast Asia has no history of military conflict like Northeast Asia or Northern Europe. This is an area where you can have local supply chains and local security and local growth without having to worry about any of the heartburn. This means that there's going to be more wood pulp coming from this area, but it also means that this is probably the fastest growing demographic for plastics and paper consumption. So, mixed bag. And they're young. Half of them are under 30. So this is a market with legs for at least the next 30 years. South America, bit of a mess. Lots of tropics again. The red is mountains. The only countries in South America that actually physically get at each other are Argentina and Brazil. And I'll tell you right now, I don't expect either of them to be going to war with the other one in at least the next 15 years. After that, we'll talk. Brazil is now entering what is probably going to be a 2-decade depression because of local factors. That's a whole different presentation. But these are countries that have no transport insecurity, they have no concerns about external stability, and their internal stability issues are all manageable and containable. So the market we've seen grow there in the last 15 years, it's probably going to slow in its rate of growth because the boomers are pulling back their money, but it's not going to stop. It's not going to overturn like some places in Europe or Asia. You also have demographics that are pretty favorable. The Technicolor Dreamcoat down there in the bottom right, that's the Central Americans put together. We have a free trade agreement with all of them because of CAFTA. These are some of the world's best demographies. Now, Brazil is aging very quickly, and it will be older than the average Brazilian will be older than the average American by 2040, but that's a problem for 25 years from now. Between now and then, plenty of markets to be had. The bigger problem, of course, is that Brazil produces 20% of the world's wood pulp. There's no reason to expect that to go away because that's a dollar-denominated commodity in a country in depression, has very low capital costs for production. If anything, they're going to be doubling down on that specific industry. It's like wood pulp is weird. It's the only commodity I follow that doesn't look at a complete overhaul of how it works because of the global changes. But the biggest market that you guys need to keep your eye on is absolutely Mexico. There are 4 big reasons why Mexico is going to be the most dynamic economic growth economy in the world for at least the next half century. First, shale. Not theirs, ours. Every line on here that is red is a natural gas distribution pipeline that was already operational at the start of the shale era. Everything else is under construction right now. All of them will be fully operational by the end of this year, which will enable the United States to ship to Mexico 12 BCF of natural gas a day, making the Mexican-American Energy Partnership the largest in world history. Brownouts, blackouts in the maquiladora industry about to disappear. Second, labor costs. Here we've got some monthly labor costs from Southeast Asia. Here's Mexico right in the middle, very competitive. Here's China. Chinese labor costs have increased by a factor of 10 in the last 15 years. And Mexican labor is now cheaper and more highly skilled. So we see an FDI boom going on in Mexico right now to take advantage of that. Third, demographically, it's a young place. A little steep down there at the bottom, but that's not going to be a problem in the next 20 years. And then finally, the drug war is quite possibly the best thing that has ever happened to the country from an economic point of view. That requires a bit more explanation. You don't primarily invest in Mexico to invest in the local market, although it's almost $1 trillion market now. It's becoming real in its own right. You go to take advantage of the fact that Mexican labor isn't necessarily cheap, just that it's cheaper than American labor. It's the differential you're after. You produce cheap in Mexico, you sell high in the United States. The better things get in the United States, let's say we elect somebody who isn't a moron. Let's say we sponsor a national infrastructure revitalization program. All of these things push up American business potential, but also pushes up labor costs. Every time there's another beheading in Mexico, every time there's a crime spree, every time that the cartels knock off a Supreme Court judge, it pushes down labor costs in Mexico. It's the differential that matters. So little ACBAS words, but it works. And I see no decline in demand for cocaine in the United States. So also good for growth in Mexico. you're looking at the new industrial superpower. But unlike China, where it's been built on a credit bubble, here it's built on actual fundamentals and white powder. There's also a new country that's coming in from the cold, Cuba. In a world where the United States doesn't really care about economic issues and it's all about security, Cuba's, a minor annoyance, but not really a problem. In a world where the United States is more mercantile with its economic policy, Cuba is in the wrong place at the wrong time, because it is almost straddling an American internal waterway between the Gulf of Mexico and the East Coast. The Castros saw this coming. The Castros settled for terms, and that's why we have the normalization process right now. Well, this is 12 million people with an educational standard about 3/4 as good as the United States, who will work for 10% of the wages. This is the next mini Mexico. And we are undoubtedly going to absorb it into our NAFTA-CAFTA free trade system as soon as this normalization process is complete. So that's 12 million people who can really bootstrap very quickly, who will need to buy absolutely everything from the United States. It's the only virgin market out there, and it's right here. One final depressing point before I close. All of this, the energy split, the demographic change, the Americans walking away from the global order, all of it is phenomenal for the US dollar. Because where else do you put your money? Last year, what we have here is a map of all the world's financial centers. Every dot on this map had a net flow to the United States in 2015. Total capital flight to North America was $2.25 trillion. The largest volume in absolute and relative terms since 1939. It's just the start, which means that financing costs for at least the next couple of years during this transition period are going to be even bigger. I'm sorry, the financial transfers will be bigger, but the financing costs will be low. This environment we've been in the last 3 years, where anyone who wanted to can get a loan, we got legs left. And so from a mergers and acquisitions point of view, the single largest constraint is typically financing. That is not an issue for the next 36 months in the United States. So the shape of your industry, where you're seeing fewer and fewer faces, expect that to, if anything, accelerate in the near term. All right, that's enough for 45 minutes. Let me just give you these 3 lists. First, these are the countries that are going to be high growth for all consumables. They have safe physical geography, stable growing demography. These are it. You have a also-ran list where the demography isn't quite as young, where the physical security isn't quite as safe, but they're still solid markets. They're not going anywhere. And then if you're feeling risky and brave, here's where you can make lots of money, because they will not have the capacity to make their own. You just have to make sure that while sailing to Korea, you don't get sank by a Chinese trawler. Fun times. Final map for Q&A. Blue countries, rulers of the chaos. They will do very well in the world to come. They have everything that they need. They can't mess it up. Green countries, more or less the same strategic and economic situation they're in today. Doesn't mean they'll always win, but they'll do very well. Yellows and browns, that's where things start to fall apart. Difference between those two categories. The yellows have something. An educated population, a young population, self-sufficient in food or energy, ally who has their back, something. They can meet the challenges of the new era head on. They'll lose a lot. They're definitely in a worse situation than they are today. But they'll struggle through. The browns won't. The browns are absolutely dependent upon the world of today. They need global trade. They need global financial transfers. And they will not be able to function in their current methods in just 2 to 5 years. And as for the reds, well, if you don't know their names now, don't bother learning them. They won't be there in 5 years. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't have more better news, but thanks for the chuckles. I really do appreciate that. It makes it easier.